University and Director of the Africa Policy Center. I want to welcome everyone here today. Thank you so much for coming. I know others will be coming with us, and we have a distinguished group sitting with me at the table, but I will introduce some of them to you. Let me tell you just briefly that the Africa Policy Center was established at Uganda Christian University a few years ago by the Vice Chancellor, and also under the guidance of the Church, the Chancellor, the House of Bishops, and a number of others who have participated in its formation. It's a research center, a think tank, a center of excellence in pursuing the understanding of public policy from a biblical Christian perspective. We're part of Uganda Christian University. We are a part of the School of Research and Postgraduate Studies. Our Dean, Kukunda Elizabeth Bachwaya, is here. I'd like to thank her for coming and recognize her. And our Director of Research, Peter Babajazwa, is also here. So thank you so much for being part of this as well. Any questions you have or interest that you have in APC, please direct them to me or some of the others that are here working with me. Thank you so much. I've also been tasked with letting you know who some of the panelists will be before you meet both the guest of honor as well as our guest speaker. Our panelists include the Reverend Canon Dr. Rebecca Obianuju, who you've already heard from. She's currently serving as Provost of All Saints Cathedral, Nakasero, and previously served as the chaplain at Uganda Christian University. And we miss her so much. And I'm very happy to have her here with us on the panel. She's a PhD from University of KwaZulu-Natal, MA from Trinity Episcopal School for Ministry in the U.S., Bachelor of Divinity UCU, Certificate in Theology from Bishop Usher College in Buwalasa. She's from the East. She served in many capacities in the church, is a mother and a wife, and very welcome to the panel. Thank you. We're also joined on the panel by Dr. Christine Andoa. Dr. Andoa is a senior consultant pediatrician with 24 years of experience in Uganda's public service and 15 years experience as a global health leader. She has served as the Health Minister for the Republic of Uganda, Director General of Uganda AIDS Commission, Regional Referral Hospital Director for Jinja and Bara Hospitals, respectively. She's quite well trained in dealing with infectious diseases, immunization, HIV/AIDS, malaria, etc. She notes here that she was the first female ever to take up many of these positions that I've just mentioned. We're very proud of her and happy for her to have that. She's involved in quite a number of things, which I hope she'll tell you about as she continues to share with us. Our third panelist is Mr. Timothy Kalyajira, who is a journalist, a researcher, a writer, and writes on governance, social trends. He's written in many of the media outlets and is better known now for his work on social media. He's taken that up as primary means of expression, and he's learning the ways in which that is very, very influential. Very concerned about the things that are being discussed today, and it's going to bring a lively and challenging perspective to us as these things are discussed. Thank you so much. At Africa Policy Center, we're very proud to be able to put on this national symposium, and again, I want to thank you all for coming, and appreciate very much the support as we grow and build up this Christian witness in the public square. So it's now my privilege to recognize and invite our Deputy Vice Chancellor for Finance, Administration, External Affairs, and just about everything else, and UCU, from what I've noted lately, who will introduce the others on the panel. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, and praise the Lord. We are glad that you honored our invitation for you to be here this afternoon with us. Our chief guest, Justice Mike Chibita, Justice of the Supreme Court of Uganda, our chief guest and speaker, Madame Uju, the nickname that we have given her. Our distinguished panelists, Dr. Larry Adams, the Director for the Africa Policy Center, Honorable Minister Peace Mutuza, distinguished guests in our midst, and especially recognize Mr. Jack Blake, who is coming with us from the US. As you see, it's a joy for us to be able to engage in the public square. When we having a debate within management on how we are able to engage in the public square, as Dr. Adams has mentioned, that's what gave birth to the Africa Policy Center. And today we are honored in our midst to have a renowned speaker, as well as an author. Madame Uju is an author, and today she'll be speaking to us from one of the subjects she's written about. She has written a book, Target Africa, Ideological Neocolonialism in the 21st Century. It's available at the back, so if you'd like to have a copy, please do approach the Secretariat at the back. But she is also a pro-life activist. And that's probably what really brought that proxy between us and her. That she speaks on a number of issues that are pertinent in our public square. When you talk of issues of poverty and move around this country, you move around this continent, those issues speak to you. The consequences of poverty is something that we live with. When you look at issues of abortion, sexuality, issues of rights, these are issues that are prevalent. And what is our position on all this? Our position as Ugandans, our position as Africans, our position as academicians. And ask ourselves a question: are we informed to be able to engage in the public square? Often, we've had people come up and give us many sweeping statements. There is a lot of poverty, there is a lot of abortion. But when you present these statements before the policymakers, you'll be shortened. They'll be asking you, give us the facts, give us the prevalence. And I'm glad that Madame Uju has carried out research on the subject she speaks about. And I think we as members in the academia, but also in society, is how do we package our messages with empirical data, that we are able to speak from facts of what is real and what is prevalent. She has been able to speak to a number of audiences: the African Union, ECOWAS, governments, parliamentarians, and also globally in the United Nations. And she is a voice that is out there, that as Uganda Christian University and the Africa Policy Center were identified with, that we can be ambassadors to make a difference on the ills, on the pains that our society is going through. And today, as you listen in, my challenge: what is your takeaway? You definitely, by saying yes to our invitation, you're identifying yourself as a factor in the public square. And what is your takeaway in the public square? Shall we look on and see the poverty that goes on? Shall we observe the neo-colonialism that is going on? Shall we say we remain disadvantaged? We've been labeled many things on the continent. Do you agree with them? I count this as an opportunity for us, an opportunity to engage, an opportunity to make a difference. That our challenges should not let us down, but our challenges should be platforms on which we can speak out and make a difference. I'm not the speaker. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite Madame Uju to speak to us from her heart on issues that are pertinent, but thereafter we'll have a chance for our distinguished panelists and to engage on the subject matters that should be discussed with us. And thereafter, we all will have an opportunity to engage with the themes that will be coming up in our discussion. And I'm going to welcome.
Thank you so very much. All protocols observed. Please permit me to also be seated. I know it would be better if I could stand, but yesterday we had some real serious technical challenges that came from computer and all of that. So please pardon me that I'm sitting here just so that I can take care of this phone, maybe this laptop, to make sure it serves us well. But I'm indeed very grateful and honored to be here among you. Just as the APC had said, a lot of my work has been around the continent of Africa, and it's been also around the Western world. A bit of my background, I am Nigerian, so not one of the Nigerians in the Nollywood, sorry. But I am a Nigerian, but a Nigerian who also sees myself very much as an African, as a daughter of Africa. So every bit of me will I also identify as Ugandan. I have come to this wonderful country several times, and I have many good friends who are indeed Ugandan. So I'm grateful to get this opportunity to address you in this very forum, this distinguished forum. So my topic today that I'll be speaking about will be one of the many things that I have been speaking about in the last 7 years. But before I go deep into it, because it's on family planning and aid addiction in Africa, I just need to put out one little quick note so that it will just prepare the minds of people, because when anyone sees me about to present on family planning, maybe some people become defensive. This is not me coming against family planning. This is not me saying, don't do family planning, don't see family planning as something that is a way of healthcare. But this is me presenting family planning as something that has now been used as a tool by donors, Africa's donors, in the way they have treated Africa. I cannot find any real grounds to challenge me based on the data that I usually present. They would say to me something like, you are Nigerian, and you're talking about Africa like it's one little place. Africa is not a country. Africa is a continent. They try to take me down or cut me down just a little bit. So I usually put this forward, that yes, I do know that there are 54 countries in Africa. I know that. I come from one of those countries. And I know that Africa is home to about 1 billion people, or a little bit more. Almost 3,000 native languages spoken across our wonderful continent. There are thousands of tribes and ethnic groups. You do have many of them here in Uganda, even in Nigeria, in my own country, we have so many ethnic groups. So, did I cut off everything? That is what it is for this, yeah. Again, you see why I had to sit down, and this is only me sitting. So thousands of tribes and ethnic groups, and there are also many creeds that profess, and therefore really, there is no one African culture. No, you can't, technically it is really not correct for me to say the African culture. But I still continue to stand on that, and I still continue to insist on speaking about Africa like one home, one unit, one land. Why? Because I do know that there are common threads that run through our various African customs and cultures, from one country to the other, from one corner of Africa to the other. I've been through different African countries and different regions, and I have had the privilege of speaking to people in different parts of society. And yes, I see things far away from Nigeria that I personally can identify with. Those cultures and traditions are traditions that actually value motherhood, value parental rights, would have a particular view of the human sexuality and the dignity of the human sexuality, will value marriage between man and woman, will value the child in the womb, recognizing life from the womb. But this is what our donors say to us, even if it's to us or within their own forums. They say that African population is the problem. We have heard this phrased in one way or the other. I'll give you just a few examples. It was only about 2 years ago, or not even that, when we heard that African women are having 7 or 8 children per woman. And I put there, who said it? A European leader. I will say it here because it wasn't in secret, it was all in the press, everybody heard about it, people talked about it on social media. It was President Emmanuel Macron of France. And he said this speaking to his fellow Westerners at a huge fundraiser that was organized by the Gates Foundation. And when he said this, of course, there was a huge fight back on social media. The way he generalized and he talked about African women having 7 or 8 women per children, and that's a problem. He said it's not really the colonialism, it's the fact that African women have this amount of children. We also heard at one point in time, and just a couple of years back as well, that famines in Ethiopia are as a result of too many people for too little land. And this was said by none other than a renowned British TV personality, again, because it was all there in the media. I would say that he's not in hiding. This is a man who has done a lot of documentaries and a lot of things on animals and such, and he was commenting on this problem in Ethiopia. His name is David Attenborough. In fact, he's a knighted man, so he's Sir David Attenborough. You might hear his voice as a voiceover used for a lot of the animal shows. So it's interesting that he was commenting on Africa as if we ourselves are animals. It's very unfortunate. And he said that in this interview that was entitled "Humans Are Plague on Earth," that was the actual title of this interview that he did. That was out in Guardian. I think it was Guardian. So then we heard another person say, sometime last year, one of the biggest problems that the world is facing is rapid population growth in Africa. This was said in a podcast, so I guess maybe he didn't know that the audience was eventually going to blow up. And again, it was a very well-known American philanthropist, his name, Bill Gates. So look at the way Western leaders, prominent people within the West, the way they are speaking about Africa, especially when they are talking to one another. You can already see the mindset whenever it's turned towards Africa. These are some of the wealthiest people, these are some of the most influential people. In the case of David Attenborough, he's one of the most respected men as far as human ecology is concerned. So whatever he says is really quite, is quite a concern if he's talking about the Ethiopians, as if the Ethiopians are not really human. So, now that I've given you all the full disclosure that I gave you 2 slides off, but the one thing that they keep thinking about from the comments that I've just shared is the fact that Africa is a home to 1 billion people. That is what they are constantly concentrating on. It's not that so much as our, the real diversity, the excellent, beautiful tribes we have, all the amazing things about Africa, the colorful nature of all the things in our traditions and cultures. What they're really thinking about as they deal with African countries, which then translates into policy, is the fact that Africa has about 1 billion people. So, who are these donors? They are entire nations, they are organizations, and they are private foundations. And so they approach us, and when they approach us in bilateral relationship between our countries and theirs, or between the organization and our own African countries, this is usually how it plays out. They give foreign aid to the African country, and then the foreign aid, for people who don't know, because for many years I went around thinking foreign aid is a very simple matter. It's someone giving millions of dollars or thousands of dollars or whatever to a country in need, or to a city in need, or to a town in need, or to a program in need, right? So as an African, I was out there just thinking, well, it's just they come and they build us a school and they go away. But it's actually a bit more complicated than that. And anybody who wants to do a bit more more research into this can find all about aid from this organization called the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They are the ones that do all the tracking, and it's excellent because it's an independent group, and it's a group that is actually pro-aid. So they are doing it just for their own records. So they get the aid, all the aid package, and it's divided into various sectors. Now, one of the major sectors is the social sector foreign aid. Now, that's the part of aid that would entail everything that most people think when they think aid. It includes money for education, it includes funds for healthcare, it includes funds and support for water supply and sanitation, as well as government and civil society, and this category called population and reproductive health. Now, let's then look at this graph. Yesterday I shared it as a bar, but then today I'm sharing it as like an actual graph, so that you can see what has happened over a period of about 17 years. From 1996 to 2012, 2013, you look at how the graph has gone. If you can look at that, it's just a lot of things running through. But then, unfortunately, you can't see the color, but I have put some arrows in to show you that of everything that was being given to African countries, and you see the title of that graph is actually the analysis of social sector, ODA, which is the official development assistance, which is the same thing as foreign aid to Africa since 1996. So these are the real records that they are keeping. By 1996, the lowest thing we were getting, African nations were getting, the very lowest funding was for population and health, population and reproductive health money. So everything that will include abortion groups, sexual and reproductive right groups, condoms, contraception, family planning. Yes, again, that family planning. It was the lowest thing. They were giving us much more for education. They were giving more for water and sanitation. The very lowest thing that they gave us was for family planning. Rightly so, because if you go from one African country to the other, if you give somebody a piece of paper and you say, write down for me everything that you need, I don't know that even family planning would be the last thing that would even be on that list. It would be, people saying they want education for their children, they want money for healthcare, they want to be able to go to hospital and get treatment for their children, they want some protection, they want good water supply, just basic needs, electricity supply. But then, gradually, or maybe not so gradually, from 1996, the population program funds started to increase. It's a very clear increase. Starts to increase, and by 2007, during the recession in the West, something incredible happened, that African nations started to get more money, in general, more money than anything else. So it superseded everything else, and ever since then, at least up until the last of this record, which is 2013, population control, let's just call it population control funds, remained the highest. So let me put this for you in perspective. Imagine that you are in a house or in a household, and there is no clean drinking water in that household. The children in that household are hungry, and someone else is very ill and needs urgent health care. Children are not going to school, and so on and so forth. And a wealthy person walks into that room, looks at this household with all their ailments, with all the problems, with all the difficulties, and the person says, oh, I'll tell you what I got you today, I got you some condoms. Now, it's only a person who is either blind, of which we know our donors are not blind, they have research, they have everything, and so they have access to all information, they know all the needs of Africa, or perhaps somebody who really does not care, or somebody who has an agenda or an ideology. And that's exactly what I think is being played out in these numbers and statistics that we are looking at today. Population and reproductive health expenditure, you may ask how much exactly is it? Yes, it might be that the population and reproductive health money has kept increasing. Yeah, but it might not be that much. It might not be, it might not be all that much money. So let me give you some numbers that you can go home with. $4 billion from 610 million. This is, if you do the mathematics, an increase that will amount to about 1,932% increase. It's beyond anything the human mind can grasp, at least for me, within a short space of time, that somebody will increase the amount of funding that is given to the so-called family planning and reproductive health that's more than 100 billion altogether that has been given out to this particular program, or these kinds of programs, in the space of 20 years. And for those of us who are Africans and we sit here and we wonder, of all of this, Africa gets about 70% of every family planning money that is given out by donors. That means that it's not for them let's just increase because we think people around the world need family planning and need population control. It's that of everybody we give money to, the Africans we think deserve 70% of that money. By the way, we don't get 70% of the education money, if you're wondering, but we get 70% of the family planning money. And all of this, for anyone who wants to question the source of the data, it's very easy. It's all archived as the financial resource flows of population activities, which is put together by the United Nations Population Fund. So the data is their data. These are the kinds of headlines that we have to deal with in the West. So I live in the UK, I don't know if I mentioned that at the beginning, but I live in the United Kingdom and I've lived there for the last 14 years now. And sometimes you wake up and you go on the internet and you go on some of our major newspapers, and these are the kinds of headlines that come about Africa. It's not anything nice you've done, it's not anything, good news, it's always something like this. This is a headline from the Telegraph, which is one of the most prominent papers in London. UK to help poorest women around the world gain access to birth control. And there is a picture of some African women sitting there. UK to help poorest women around the world gain access to birth control. They really mean Africa, it's not so much around the world, but Africa. It came up a couple of years back. It says, the headline says, international donors get Bayer. Bayer is a well-known pharmaceutical company. International donors get Bayer to cut price of implantable birth control for the poor. And standing next to President Bill Clinton, who was the one brokering that deal, even though he wasn't president at the time, this only happened a few years ago, but he was brokering the deal with a pharmaceutical company to give a cut price. So he was trying to kind of subsidize this implant-type birth control for the poor. But how do I know the poor really means the Ugandan women and the Kenyan women and the Nigerian women? Is because there is a tiny bit of a person who's caught up in that picture with the hat. That's my former president, the former Nigerian president, Goodluck Jonathan. So we know who he's talking about, and we know who the program is for. Mind you, a lot of the implants, even in Western countries, have come under great scrutiny as women continue to have all kinds of problems with side effects and such. But still, up until now, people are going around brokering deals, getting us subsidies on birth control. Now, as an African, we should be asking some question like this. How many antibiotics, life-saving antibiotics, that Bayer produces, have they got a deal for us on so that when it comes to Uganda, it's subsidized? I don't think that we're going to get any good answer to that question. So, but we will have the New York Times report on the birth control subsidies for you and for me. That's exactly what we see in international media. And again, just as I had alluded to before, a lot of these things, when they say it, they're not really saying African women. We now have to deduce that it is African women that the donors are really talking about. They always say the poor women, people in the developing world. How do we know that they are targeting African women? Sometimes sometimes you have to do a bit more investigative work, sometimes you have to do more digging, sometimes you have to go through so many of their websites. She said she was going to get it for the people with unmet need, the 220 million people women that they keep quoting, 220 million women in need of family planning. Melinda Gates is out there from 2012 trying to raise $5 billion to provide family planning to meet that unmet need. And she says it's for the 69 poorest countries. 69 poorest countries. So the first time I heard it, it was a huge question mark. She didn't say Africa, she said 69 poorest countries. Some World Bank reports to know who classifies as the 69 poorest countries. Guess what? Almost every single one of our 54 African countries fit into the 69 poorest countries. So it's a nice way of having a cutoff point. So you count where it is and then you cut off, not at 70, not at 71. Once you hit that Africa mark, all the African countries fall under that line. That's it. You were part of the 69 poorest countries, and those were her target countries. Well, not alone. There was a three-team press conference that was held in, I think it was 2014. If I remember, November 2014, if I remember correctly, and it was held in conjunction with Pfizer, and then the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they announced exactly what this project was going to look like when it was rolled out, because they started off in 2012 doing a huge fundraiser, which by their account was very successful because they got a lot of people involved in it. They raised funds throughout the Western world. They then mentioned or told the world in this press conference about the particular birth control that was coming through this program, because it wasn't just for any birth control. They were going to choose themselves exactly what was coming under this $5 billion project. It was a Cyanide press. The Cyanide press, when you check it, the Cyanide press is a little injectable. I hope you can see, I'm going to put up a picture of it. It's a self-injectable contraception, but it's a brand name. Cyanide press is also known as the Depo-Provera. The Depo-Provera, for anyone who works anywhere near medical field, if you have monitored what has happened in the West, Depo-Provera is one of those contraceptive drugs that have in fact been widely criticized, because a lot of women react to it, a lot of women have had real issues with it. But if it's happening in a Western country, you react to a contraception drug or device, you go to your doctor the next day, and then they remove it, or they change it for you, or they give you something to help with the side effects. Sometimes women have taken Depo-Provera and have complained of things like constant bleeding. You know, it's like the woman is in her period, but instead of the period stopping after 5 days, imagine a woman bleeding for 1 whole month, 2 months, 3 months of bleeding every single day of her life. People have had, many people, significant amounts of people, have had these kinds of side effects in the West. Now think about that happening to some woman whose hemoglobin level is so low because she's malnourished and she's somewhere in a Ugandan village. And she's bleeding day 1, day 2, day 3, day 30, day 60, because somebody came from the West and gave her something that came under a $5 billion project that was meant to be a nice gift, but eventually has ended up making her life horrible. So Depo-Provera was exactly the device that they chose. It's also quite curious, because this is sort of an academic forum. Yes, I can share this. In 2011 and 2012, some peer-reviewed journals were put forward that if you look at it, it was originally sponsored, yes, by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they had done some huge testing before this program. They did a very robust testing, thousands of women in various regions of Africa. And they found out that Depo-Provera was quite questionable because of the way they thought through that research, in conclusion, that it made women more vulnerable to the HIV virus. So these were all peer-reviewed journals, all came out. So, but then the conclusion that was then given in that particular study is that, well, the virus, perhaps they should also use a condom in addition to getting the depo, because they think that the depo is so good that it doesn't really matter that it makes women more vulnerable. And while we think about this, just keep having in mind that this is not some abstract thing. This is African countries, African towns, African villages that are being put into consideration here. And that was all swept under the carpet. So the dangerous drugs, the dangerous side effects that come with all of these things, also very questionable. These are people that have access to everything. They have research. They have, teams of people, entire institutes in medical schools across the different medical schools in Western countries, studying these things, and eventually they still find out something is bad. They still find out something may be dangerous. They still find out something may, in fact, be detrimental, but then it's African women. Perhaps there is no real oversight. Perhaps you can still go forward with it. Yes, maybe we'll give you more condoms, and that then gets swept under the carpet and the World Health Organization perhaps accepts it. I think this is unacceptable. In this age and time when everyone is outraged over everything, I do not think that African women have really been treated well by the donors who are giving a lot of money for these programs and who keep pushing their program even when they find things that should really give them pause. This is really what I find and what I call as the war against African fertility. That's what it's really about, I think, in conclusion, from everything that I have seen. With a needle at the end of it. So you use it as one time, you inject it, and it goes right into the arm. So that's what the sign-up press looks like. That's what the sign-up press looks like. Some of the delivery methods, that's what the sign-up press looks like. You see, all these pictures that I'm sharing, what they have in common, apart from the sign-up press I'm showing you, they are all black women's hands holding it. Every time that you see sign-up press online, even though it's a Western website, they always show you a black woman holding it. Always black women. Always black women. So we are being targeted. If that is the question, it should no longer be a question. It's the way that it's being presented, it's the way that it's being marketed. So let's look at the fertility trends. The fertility trends that have them so concerned, so worried, because Africa, we've mentioned that African women have so many children, so it's the problem in the world, it's where all of that. So let's look at the data that there is available. The fertility trends have been dropping so drastically around the world. Some people have called it a demographic winter in some parts of the Western world. There are, in fact, many countries within the Western world where fertility rate is so dangerously low that they are heading towards some catastrophic thing happening with the demographic. There are places where at this point it's almost irreversible because women are having 1.6 children, 1.7 children, and the replacement rate is meant to be something like 2, where you replace yourself and you replace your husband. Okay? So 2 is minimum, but then there are many countries that don't even meet that 2, and some are going towards 1.5. Some have gone below 1.5 in parts of Asia. Now, if you can see the graph, again, I apologize for how unclear that is, but if you can see the graph there, you can see every part of that graph going down. The one at the very top, it's good that I put an arrow there, is Africa. In fact, not just Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, so where we are right now. 42 countries of the sub-Saharan African region. The black people, that can put it better. We are also having a reduction, like everybody else. And this is data that runs from 1960 to 2011, so it's fairly recent. And it gives you a nice, clear picture that has happened over a very good period of time. So you can say this is reliable data. We are falling like everybody else. The problem they are having is this, is that even though in 35 years, sub-Saharan African region has had a fertility decline, we are having a fertility decline of about 25%. So people are having 25% less children than people were having in the 1960s and the 1970s. In fact, if you look at it, it's around really 1985 that we got into this stage where a lot of Africans were then having 25% less children. My mother has 6 children. especially among people who have a lot of education, people who have westernized, if you like, because a lot of them are having less children, not because they can't afford it, because my sisters have a lot more money than my parents did. They wouldn't like me saying that, but they do have a lot more disposable income than my parents, and both each had 3 kids. In London, where they can have it. But anyway. So this is how the fertility has been dropping, including for the sub-Saharan African people. 25% drop in 35, over a period of 5 years. The fertility decline is about half the rate elsewhere in the developed or developing world, the rest of the developing world. So what is the problem here that Nigerians are having? The real problem is that there is so much decline in other parts of the world, and even though, yes, Africa is declining, so even if they wanted us to decline, we are declining, but we are not declining fast enough. That's the problem. So let's then look at the population, because they say they are concerned about the population in some regard. Sometimes when there is a bit of honesty, you will see that all this family planning money they're giving us, it's not really about us staying healthy, it's about us controlling population, especially across the sub-Saharan African region. So let's look at the data, at least as of today, okay? So across the entire continent of Africa, there are 36.4 people, okay, let's say 35 people per kilometer square. That is our population density. As of now, as of today, if you went online, it will be that. All right? So I did update this quite recently. So let's then look at another continent from where a lot of our donors are coming from. So this is Europe. This is all of Europe. And let's check the population density of Europe as of today. 72.9 people per kilometer square. So Europe, as it is now, has actually twice the population density of the African continent. And yet, they keep giving us more and more money because they need the population to decline quicker than it actually is doing. So let's talk about the true size of Africa, because it comes a bit as a surprise. But the point here is Africa is much larger than most people realize. Most times when we see Africa on a map, we take it that Africa is really about approximately the same size as like Latin America, right? Because it's all there. But in 2010, someone had done a great study that eventually ended up being published in the November edition of The Economist. His name is Kai Krause, and he called it the true size of Africa. And the true size of Africa, again, you can't see the screen really well, that within our African continent, this great, beautiful continent of ours that we love so much, you can fit in all of the United States with its 300 million people. You can fit in all of Eastern Europe with the 275 million people. We still have some space. And in that space that you have, you can fit in much of Western Europe with the more than 200 million people. You can fit in all of China. China has 1 billion people. Even with the United States in there, even with Eastern Europe in Africa, even with Western Europe in Africa, China can still somehow be fitted by landmass into our great continent. And the list keeps going. You can fit in all of India with its 1 billion people, all of India, into the continent of Africa. And yet we still have some space for Japan. We still have some space for Japan. This came out in The Economist. If it wasn't peer-reviewed, if it wasn't accurate, The Economist would not publish it. It was not challenged. Again, even somebody else I know has gone ahead and still done something similar and still tried to fit in like different other parts of the world into our great continent of Africa. The point is this: Africa is much larger than how the map appears. The map has to be drawn the way it is, I suppose, to, for convenience, and just not to confuse people, but I'll tell you that the African continent is huge. So he called it the emergency. He said it's the great crime of emergency that people commit when they're dealing with Africa. The same happens with my country, Nigeria. On the map, we look so small, but in Nigeria, you can fit in all of the United Kingdom, I think all of Italy, all of Germany, and we look just as small as Germany when you look at the map of the world. That's the way it is with most African countries. Okay? Yet, with this map in mind, and not this map, but the actual map that we see, they come to the Ugandan government and members, of the government and people who are in charge of policy, and they tell you, look at the map. Do you know how many millions of people in Uganda? It's a problem, and what you're doing, you're looking at Uganda and you're looking at the UK, and they tell you, look at your population, you have to do something, and you're saying, we want to be like the UK. Let me tell you that the UK has a lot more population density than we do. In fact, the UK is competing with Nigeria, and you all know that Nigeria is the giant of Africa. Okay? But I still love Uganda. I still love Uganda. Okay. So this is really it. This is when they are doing anything that has to do with policy, when they are formulating all of these things, when they are planning out all of their population programs with all that $12 billion a year, mind you that they have a map in front of them, which in fact is largely not so accurate according to accounts. So that's about population. So the long-term gifts and the high dependency and addiction. It's so hard for me to speak about aid addiction, because aid addiction is something that has to do with Africa ourselves. It's easy for me to say all the things that our Western donors have done to us. When I was writing my book, Target Africa, it was so easy. When I got the research, just putting it together, then I'm finding more things, Yes, sometimes it did break my heart, some of the things I saw. I went over some of the data, when I saw, for example, all the billions of dollars being given to programs that the Africans themselves never asked for, and I knew that people within the African continent didn't have as much education access as they should do, the healthcare they didn't need, all the things that they needed. Sometimes I would break down and cry. All the time I was writing that book. But it was still much easier for me to believe that somebody else was hurting us than for me to get to that chapter of aid addiction, where I had to talk about the reason why Africa, or why people within the African continent, have made us very vulnerable to the donors who have hurt us in many ways. And it has to do with our love of free money. It's true. It's true. It was very hard for me. And I did mention it in the book to say, it's harder to look in the mirror to see things within your own self that has made you vulnerable, has made you, put you in the position that you find yourself. About $50 billion goes to Africa every year as ODA, Official Development Assistance. That's about the amount of money Africa gets as of now. 50 billion, sometimes a little more, but it just lingers around the 50 billion mark a year, shared among the different African countries. And yet, World Bank supported a white paper that came out some years ago, which was entitled The Illicit Financial Outflows from Various Parts of the World. And then it did reveal that Africa's illicit financial outflows from the year 1970 to 2008, so again, not that long to go over that period of time, was about $854 billion. $854 billion. If you're wondering what they mean by illicit financial outflows, everybody here probably knows it, but it just means money that has gotten missing in different African countries, money that has been embezzled, that has been buried, has somehow gotten lost, money that should have been used for various things within the African continent, that then somehow misses road and, as we say in Nigeria, just disappears. $854 billion. Meanwhile, we have been receiving $50 billion a year. So the Corruption Perception Index, with the CPI, which is an indices that will, in a way, it's hard to rate corruption. Yeah, because there's corruption everywhere. There's corruption everywhere. There's no corruption in the West. I mean, there's corruption everywhere. But in a way, sometimes you want to compare from one country to the next. How do you know, how do you rate or gauge a country with regards to corruption? So the Corruption Perception Index is quite a good one that I find, that rates countries up to 100. It's not percentage, they say, but it's just up to the point of 100. And the higher you are, the more transparent you are, the less corrupt you are. Okay, so it's like getting the marks. And the least corrupt countries in the world, which of course are in Europe, are almost 90. They get up to 90 points. It's just for you to know. All right. Those are the countries that just managed to cross over 50. Botswana, I think, is the best of them because they're high up there, I think, in the 60, more than 60 points they score on the CPI. And you're wondering there, what is Uganda? What is Uganda? I did find out just for you, okay? Because I knew somebody would ask me. As of this year, as of the last data that was available, I think it's from 2017, the CPI for Uganda was 28. So you score 28 out of 100. And some people who are even more curious will ask, what is Nigeria? Which is my country. And we are even worse than Uganda because we score 26. So we don't even make them pass mark. We are really in the red state of the red. That's the CPI, right? So this culture of long-term aid really goes hand in hand with a culture of corruption, which is really an undeniable fact. There is no place that I could find in the world where the CPI was high. So countries that don't have corruption who are still struggling. So in other words, any money that is meant for something, the Botswanans mean business, they will use it for that thing. But it's not really the story across the continent of Africa, most parts of it. So how much exactly is the total amount of aid? We get about 50 billion. The rest of, with everybody, the rest of the developing world, all of us together, we get about $146 billion a year, at least as of 2017. 146. So Africa gets about a whole third of the development package, even though there are about 150 countries that get aid. And this is what the graph looks like. At least maybe you can see it. The color doesn't matter, but this is how aid has been given from before 1970 all the way to 2015, and the very summary of this graph simply shows you that aid continues to increase. Yeah, anybody who is giving aid to Africa, if you approach any of them, any of those donors, and you say, why are you giving aid? Why do you continue giving aid to these African countries or to these Latin American countries? What they tell you is, we're hoping that they develop, we're hoping that they can come out of aid, we're hoping just to give them some help so that they will rise to, they will rise to full stature and they can support themselves. But this graph is not telling that story, is it? We keep taking more and more and more. There is almost no year that is less than the year before. It's just each year they keep adding more. So it's almost as if in this addiction, anybody who has had the misfortune of dealing with any kind of addiction, or you are dealing with any addict whatsoever, you see that it keeps increasing unless something is done about it. But in an addiction as well, there is a perverse flip side to it. It's that there is the addict, but in many cases there is the provider who continues to give you that drug. Especially somebody who sponsors it. If you know someone keeps giving you this addictive substance. When you try to come in as a third party and you're trying to end or break this addiction, sometimes, yes, you will be fighting the addict. That's not a surprise. is that the addict turns to you and the eyes are red and the person turns to you and they cannot think of their lives without this particular addictive substance. But what really comes as a shock to anyone who tries an intervention is that the provider sometimes has a perverse pleasure in being the provider for this horrible, terrible behavior. And that's what we see in aid. Because anytime anybody raises their voice, questions, okay, what's going to happen with this graph? Can we make it go down? Can we please? You find, of course, yes, you find some objections among African leaders, which is to be expected. But the shock is that you might see Bill Gates doing a video saying that it's actually immoral that somebody would ask you to cut aid or try to reduce aid. How do I know that? Dambisa Moyo, who is an African economist, really renowned, she's in the United States, she wrote a fantastic book a couple of years ago about aid and all of the economic side of it. And Dambisa Moyo made a fantastic proposal of what could happen and how Africa could come out of aid. And how she got the fight back. Not from Africa, because according to what she said, she had the president of Rwanda fly her out to Rwanda to discuss with her, to have her speak to his officials, to have her discuss policy possibilities. But it was the fact that I actually saw the video that Bill Gates had put on YouTube, and he said that that this woman, this African woman, was immoral in what she was proposing. So that's the addiction that goes both ways. We are addicted to the aid, they are addicted to giving us the aid. And who receives aid? About 150 countries. That's only just for your information. 150 countries. Mind you, every African country receives aid as of now, all right? But you can do the maths because, yeah, about 100 non-African countries also receive aid. But the reason I'm putting out this information is I need you to see what it looks like on the map. Can you see the spots and where aid is going to? Can you see where Africa is and how we are completely covered in the white spots? That shows you the concentration of aid and how much is going. So Africa is really a hotspot for aid. This is the base, this is the root of the aid addiction. There is a great power imbalance between donor and recipient, but I just think that goes without saying. That goes without saying. There is a power imbalance. Sometimes they call themselves our partners, sometimes there's all these beautiful names. The donors sometimes don't even want to be called donors. They say we're partnering with Uganda for this, that, and the other. But the truth is that there is some dynamics that goes on, and it's so easy to see when you get to international forums, when we're at the United Nations, and you see where the Africans sit, what happens, how some of the African leaders, when they're making presentations, they're using the language that is really not African, that has nothing to do with us, but they're rather talking points of the donors themselves. They continue to keep us highly dependent. We remain highly dependent on aid, but that dependence, you can see how they're fitting it and how the graph continues to go up and has ever been going on. We're getting more aid now than we got in 1970. Think about that. These are donor-conceived ideas and initiatives. When the donor gives you money, it's not really about what you want, it's about what they think that you want or what they propose to you that you need. All right? So it's most of the proposals come from them. It's not about us saying we want some schools in our communities. It's about them telling us, don't you think you need this for yourself? It's about the donor's vision of the world. It's about the donor's definition of the world. Whatever it is that they are defining and redefining, that is exactly what sets the tone to what they sponsor. They are determining what is worth funding, what is not worth funding, and by goodness, they are expecting all of you who receive aid, all of us who receive aid, to comply. All right? So it's their money, they can go away with it, but then when you say you don't want that program, you get a huge fight back. Even though it's their money and their bank, why can't we just say no? But anytime that we object, if you want to know what has happened, you check out what happened actually like a year ago or 2 years ago with the Tanzanian president. When he tried to talk about family planning, he actually made a simple comment. And he said, you know, Tanzanians, we need women to have children. He just made a simple comment. He said, why can't, our women, what's wrong in women having babies? Those are Tanzanian children. As in Uganda, don't you want Ugandan babies? Ugandan babies, aren't they beautiful? So he made a simple comment. The whole thing went all the way to the United Nations, and they were saying, oh, this man is terrible, and women, their rights, and I think they put in more concentration on Tanzania, that we have to monitor the situation some more. At some point, they found out something else, and they said, oh, we're investigating him for this, that, and the other, and some policy he made about students who can't get back to school when they're hurt. They just found all kinds of things to make a case against him, and now we're no longer hearing those kinds of statements. It's almost like they need you to be in line. If you are not in line, they knock you back in line. So there is really the expectation of compliance, and they have a culture of naming and shaming. So there's never really like a serious issue that the particular African community has not thought about how to handle or how to deal with. So we do have our own views and values, but whenever they come into whenever they come into any kind of contact with us, or when we're dealing with the donors, they don't really acknowledge our most important views and values. And these are some of the views and values that, of course, will not come as a surprise to any African person. It's family values, it's marriage, it's community, how we deal with motherhood, it's how we see parenthood, it's how maternal, paternal responsibility. So these are things that we hold dear, and no matter which country you come from in Africa, then it's not new. And yet, when the donors come in, they completely close their eyes to it, and they ignore those things, and continue with whatever policy it is that they have in mind. And whenever any African leader or any African country tries to fight back, reject their programs, say no, they will punish you for non-compliance. It's as easy as that. Uganda probably knows about this with what happened with the HIV crisis, and the fact that you were saying, actually, we don't want to rely on the whole condom thing. Once you rejected it, you thought you were just rejecting a gift that was given, but you didn't realize that it was a gift that you must have. And over the years, they kept fighting. People have studied it, people like Professor Edward Green, who was formerly at Harvard University, and the story of what happened between Uganda and the AIDS community is one that is shocking, but it's even more shocking that the rest of the world did not try to speak up for Uganda. So that's the way it is, and it plays out everywhere, in every case. Or about neocolonialism. Is this philanthropy, or is this neocolonialism? That is the pertinent question. That is the question I believe that every African should be asking in this day and age, when we can all read, we can all study, we can all go through medical peer-reviewed journals. We have everything at the tip of our fingers, and we can read and find out data as we've gone through all this data. All the data has come from their side. We have enough education to challenge what it is that has happened over the years, and that's what I think should happen. More of what should happen in various parts of our society.
On what you see in the lecture, and I think I want to start from the extreme end, because we want to get some responses from the people on the panel. Stood out for you in the debate in terms of neocolonialism.
First of all, I have to say that I'm glad to be back to see you once again. I left just 1 year ago, and it feels like in my workplace people keep asking me to leave completely, but I keep hanging around UCU. I am a mother, and a mother of 3, and my mother has never forgiven me for having 3 children. And so, as we discuss family planning, we realize the background from which we come, and we realize that our parents are still wondering which way we have chosen to go, and forgotten that we are supposed to have many children. Every time she wondered, my third born kept growing, and she kept asking, when are you having the next child. My third born is now 24, and she seems to have lost the hope, and she has not forgiven me for that. And so there are these issues that come in as we think about family planning. There are these sentiments that continue arising among our elders and our parents that can never leave their hearts. And being that for them they really do not understand where family planning came from, they actually have no explanation. But they have attached it to something that has really corrupted their children and made them not to have children. And I think that has been outstanding for most of us, that we are able to take care of these children, we are able to educate them, but we have failed to understand some of the sentiments that come with that. Slowly, as we have one children and have two children, we are losing community life. We are getting this one or two children and sometimes reach a point when they feel like, we've been talking, two of us have been talking, and now they switch off, and now we are into social media and everything else, and we've lost the community. And that is why when someone comes up to knock at our doors, our children have forgotten what it means to have visitors, because they are so individualistic, and that is what they think it is the way to go. And so, as we look at this, it comes with erasing community life, but also eroding the values of the community. And so it is one thing, and as she was speaking, this was just coming to my mind and trying to reflect on the things that probably I have not reflected upon before, when I think about the area of family planning, and also getting only the positive, but also failing to look at the negative issues that come out when we look at family planning. She talked about the target of the rural African woman. The rural African woman, friends, some of us is unfortunate that young people have grown up in town and have not been able to interact with the rural African woman, who is really my point of interest. The family planning, medicine or quality pills or whatever is sent to the district areas and rolled down to the villages. The rural woman gets this thing and she's excited about it because she's been giving birth, and most likely she has not had enough care from the husband. And so as I get this, and I can't share it with my husband, because in the African culture, a man wants children, and that is it. I want to have as many as I can. If you give me only 3, I'll get another wife, and she gives me 3, I'll get another. And when I get to 40, then I'm a man in the village, and everyone respects me. So this woman is thinking, I can't have as many as 6 children because I do not have care. And so they get together with this nurse and they begin using this pill secretly without the knowledge of the husband. But when the side effects begin reflecting and the nurse has no idea how to handle the side effects, the poor woman fears to tell the husband where the side effects are coming from. That is where the problem of suffering, pain, and uncertainty befalls the poor woman in the rural Africa. And many of these women, you've seen them. She mentioned about bleeding. There is weight where someone gets so huge that they don't know how to control it. Someone is asking, are you eating too much? The breasts reach a level of bursting. But now they are trying to look out for a solution, but the nurse who gave this drug has no solution. And there is no medical facility that is available. You know, when you're in the rural area, reaching a health center is not so possible. And these are people who sell drugs in the rural areas. And so these are some of the challenges that people are getting indeed with the family planning. It is received as a positive thing, but the side effects continuously affect these women, and some of them have died unnoticed and without treatment. And so these are some of the things that we need to think through. Probably the medical teams have not been very prepared to deal with some of these challenges. She has talked about the donor. When the donor gives you, the donor does not actually alleviate the consequences of what they are giving you. But also secondly, we realize there is a hidden agenda, the African population. For me, that is something which is so challenging for us, that we are not just giving this to improve the welfare of Africans, that they can have few children that they can be able to take care. But we are saying, how do we deal with the African population? The donation is good. Maybe the idea could be good, but the underlying hatred and evil motive that underlies the donation is a challenge to us, that we need to think about us. And also being the poorest countries and the poorest people. You know, one of the things that we have to think about here is that as we relate with our brothers and sisters from the Western world and build relationships, how are we going to build better relationships when you are calling me the poorest of the poor and the richest of the rich? It doesn't create a relationship that has a basis for me to receive with an open heart. And so as we think about this and we think about the underlying issues and the consequences and the effect this has had, which has been enormous, I think this lecture gives us something for us to think about as we look forward. I also want to mention one other thing. Donations sometimes stop us from thinking from outside the box. We receive everything and anything without scrutinizing. And this is the addiction that they are talking about. The receiver is addicted, the donor is addicted. Yes, we are addicted to receive. But I do think that as we receive, there is a need for us to evaluate and find out, why are we receiving? Why am I being given? And because of this syndrome of giving and receiving and being addicted to it, it is the begging syndrome that is now with us everywhere. And when I see the white color, I see the dollar. And when the white color sees the black color, they see the beggar. And so the beggar and the dollar have not been able to meet at a better table to discuss. And so for me, the conclusion of the matter should be that let the donor and the receiver sit at a table. If you want to give me, please give me as if you're giving to a brother and sister who is in need, with good motives, so that I can receive from you and that you can come to me as a brother coming to see a fellow brother. Because at the end of the day, our blood is red. We are the same. We are from the same God, created from the image of God, and we serve the same equal purpose. And that will help us to understand one another and not just to be thrown in a pit where I know I am drowning and you are floating. Thank you.
In the meantime, though, if you have a question or comment, there's a paper right in front of you. Just write your name and your question, and they'll be picked and drawn up.
Good afternoon, everyone. As I mentioned, I'm Dr. Christine Ondoa. I'm a medical doctor, pediatrician by training. I'm privileged, first of all, to understand a little bit of policy, a little bit of the dynamics my sister has talked about, but also a little bit of the spiritual aspect. So when you marry all the three, it gives you a little bit of advantage. When I received this book 2 days ago, I began to read it, and it's so well written that it's very hard to put it down. And as I began to read the book, I related it to an earlier book I had read by David Sepuya. I don't know if some of you have come across that book. It's called Africa's Industrialization and Prosperity. And immediately I got back to UCU if he was invited, because it would have flown very well with what she is saying. To me, my sister Okeocha brings the problem. What is the problem? The diagnosis. And Brother Sepuya's book gives an idea of what solution Africa has, what we should do. If we go into industrialization, then we will prosper and we will stop having AIDS and all these other problems. However, to reach there, many issues in life, once you have sorted them spiritually, in the spiritual realm, then the physical becomes easy. And I also had read another book by Brother Sepuya, Overcoming Africa's 10 Plagues. And in this book, he brings the 10 plagues in the book of Exodus and explains what each 10 plague meant and what we can do as Africans to deal with those 10 plagues, bring repentance, turn away from them, and then whatever diagnosis my sister made here will be stopped, and then we go into prosperity. For me, this really summarizes what I wanted to say. However, and in I think it is the 8th locust, the 8th plague is the locust. And last month he explained to us explicitly the locust, and the locust meaning corruption and judgment. So when you read there's some article he has published, if you read it, it's so vivid description and how it fits into the biblical prophecies and what is happening now. That said, let me give my comments now. I begin with family planning. Family planning, there are 3 aspects. There is the natural family planning, there is the medical family planning, which we talked about, the pills, the injectables, and so on, but also there is the surgical one, where you have done surgery for the women, the tubes are tied, for the men, the vasectomy. And in all these 3 forms, there are 3 things being achieved. That is, 1, you should not have children too early. That is, you should not have children, excuse me, when you are below 18. And that does not necessarily mean you should be given pills to delay conception and delivery until 18. Just abstaining and, not having a sexual partner and all that is a means of family planning, but it's a natural one. So that you don't have children too soon when your body is not yet prepared or when you are not yet financially prepared. Or when you decide to have children, you don't have them too many, close to each other. Then medically we recommend at least spacing of 2 to 3 years, because that gives the woman the body to recover before the next conception. Again, you do not have to do that through the pills, the injectables. There is a natural way you can do that, and it's a family planning. Or the third is that you should not have the children too late. If you have children after a certain age, they are associated with many things like congenital deformities are increased. The babies you give birth to with eye defect, heart defect, and so on are increased. So that is the concept of family planning. I'm not saying we adopt what the Western is saying, but I'm saying there are these different ways you can do it so that your dear wife gives birth when she's ready, and then she gives birth to the next child when her body has recovered and she's ready. I hope you get the concept. I thought I should bring that medical thing into this. When Okeocha went through this, the first thing you think about is, oh my God, we are doomed. How can we come out of this vicious cycle? of aid, of donation, of corruption, and being trapped there. Each one of us has a responsibility. Whether you're a student, whether you're a parent, whether you're in office, or like my sister, if you're an honorable minister at policy level, each one of us have responsibility, what we can contribute. And I like, there's so many things I underlined in the book, but the one which I want to share is in the conclusion chapter. That is page 196 and 195 to 96. Political leader, Guinean political leader, once said, Ahmed Sekou, that we prefer freedom in poverty to opulence in slavery. That is, I'd rather be free, even if I am poor, than to be in chains, get all these donations, and then everything is dictated. And maybe the dictation can range from whatever. And then the other thing that gives me hope is, in the conclusion still, page 196, like many of the Africans in the 1950s who longed for independence from their colonial masters. I long for independence from our 21st century neo-colonial masters so that Africans can rule themselves in a manner that befits their values and aspirations. And earlier, I think it was in page 15 or 19 thereabout, she mentioned of the African leaders who got together. Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, mentioned them, who say we are tired of being colonized. We need independence. Some of them shed their blood, others went through all kinds of things. People like Nelson Mandela were in prison half of their lives. But in the end, they achieved the freedom for their people in one way or another. What is it that you and I have to do now so that we gain our freedom? What is it? This is a question that I leave to you. Remember that saying each one of us has a contribution to make. First of all, we have to diagnose what it is, prayerfully what we should do, and then practically what we should do to come out of this. So I encourage that if you are able to get copies of all these 3 books, read them concurrently, and it will give you a really bigger perspective of what you and I must do for us to break free and get free. Thank you very much.
I'm sure Timothy will answer. The presentation by Obianuju is, of course, not so generic, but it's really the mainstream narration and narrative of Africa since the 1960s, i.e., the familiar Bob Marley, Walter Bradley, Kwame Nkrumah story. We were better slaves, but free, better free in poverty than in colonial enslavement. My personal view is that there's several things we misunderstand. One of them, I think, is the West. I am conservative in my views, in my morals, in my Christian beliefs, and so on. So I'm not an apologist for much of the Western liberal agenda. But we sometimes, I think, read too much manipulation, cynicism, neo-colonialism in the West, when it might not be the case. And that's why I say too much of this funnel, third world, leftist, Bob Marley, indoctrination has made us misunderstand the West. Of course, the West it looks out for its interest, but a lot of these programs are really just done, I think, naively, with the best of intentions, but not that it's necessarily a cynical, plot to bring Africa down. The West, if you know the West now, if you see the current trends in the
the West. It's not just the West vis-a-vis Africa, it's just they are a largely secular, increasingly secular civilization. They've got a crusading streak in them. They are very driven in what they set their minds to. Sometimes not, they take action before they follow all the consequences. So you can see it even among themselves. Suddenly, with no concrete, serious scientific evidence, although they seem to believe they have it, there's now belief in the West that the global climate is changing, and that's because of human activity. So all this drive to electric cars, carbon emission restrictions, and so on, it's now a new religion where the West was once Christian. Now the new religion is this good deeds without God, like change into Black Lives Matter, 1%, you know, the French Yellow Vest protests for protest's sake. Every little thing, every little comment a man makes is, you know, there's an outcry on Twitter, and that sort of thing. So that's just the West. Because Google and Facebook are this big, there's just something wrong they've done to become that big. So regulators spend all their time suspicious of the Googles and the Facebooks and Netflix, trying to break them up. So the West, even among themselves, within themselves, tend to be that way. So do not think that some of these policies geared toward Africa is because they necessarily want to recognize Africa. That's just who they are, especially the more left and intellectual and, you know, urban they tend to be. So that's just one misconception I thought should be cleared. If you look at Africa's economy, if you look at the GDP per capita and the circumstances, I mean, we know all these things. The fact, for example, that, let's say, Harvard University, just one of hundreds of universities in the US, has a budget that's larger than the GDP of Burundi. And Burundi is a Soviet country. What independent African countries are speaking about? Instagram, the photo sharing app, is now, as we speak today, if it were a national economy, it would be a bigger economy than the economies of East Africa, Horn of Africa, and Central Africa combined. This is just a mere farm photo sharing app that's on the Facebook. So Africa is a really critical situation. We need aid, is my belief. I wish we didn't need aid, but if these countries that are fragile, even as they are, had the little aid removed, it's okay for the so-called elite in the urban centers in Africa to resent Western aid and donor conditions, but the ordinary person to live in rural Africa, if you had a continent-wide referendum, then you would know how much we need the West. So just away from indoctrination, away from neocolonialism, just from a practical point of view, we just cannot sustain our budget. The last time Uganda had a balance of payments surplus, the last time Uganda exported more than it imported was 1978. That's 41 years ago, coming 52 years ago. Ever since, despite all this GDP growth rate declared every year, despite the pumping in of money from the West, we still haven't gotten back to 1978 when we exported more than we imported. We basically, for the last 41 years, we've been living beyond our means. How do you feel these budget deficits? The other day I was discussing this on Facebook, saying for all this excitement about national exam results every year, the top 10, top 15 exports of a country like Uganda, Tanzania, whichever country, to this day are still the ones of the 1950s, 1940s. Tea, coffee, flowers, fish, agriculture, primary agriculture. Not a single intellectual, IP industrial product is produced by Uganda for export among Uganda's 14 export. With all these international schools in Uganda, private schools, school fees increasing, everybody seemingly investing in education. So we're just fundamentally weak societies. We will need help. If you look at countries like the Japans and South Koreas, these industrial countries, but they still need US troops to maintain internal security and regional security. So if Japan and South Korea need American troops on this, well, why do you think Africa, this Africa that you know, is the one that does not need these countries? So we just are weak societies. Now, of course, Where I disagree with the West, and that's where, of course, keynote speaker's point of view comes in, is that because of our very weak anemic economic and social status, even when it comes to sensitive matters like, our value system, and Uganda, of course, was the epicenter of this, the same Western crusading idealism is imposed on us. So now, because the West decided on the whole question of same-sex marriage, gay rights, and all this, and modern contraception of the Western kind, that comes with an aid. And of course, so my view would be, hey, if it comes to our culture, our traditions, give us the money, give it to our main governments and our health ministries and our health systems, our NGOs, leave it to us, give us some discretion with what we do with matters cultural, religious, social, and that nature. That is my only disagreement with the West. But of course, their Planned Parenthood and all these campaigns just come out fiat flat, and it's just imposed on us. That's where the offense is. But to say that we are being somehow neo-colonized, or we can do it on the West, Uganda as it is today, it would collapse. Let them just kind of aid. I mean, you remember 2008, after this post-election violence in Kenya, just a week and a half of the border of Kenya being closed, you saw how fuel rose by 300%, and Uganda's economy almost crashed. Remove the Western aid programs in this country. Remove the HIV, the malaria, the TB interventions. Remove the Western sponsorship of Ugandan peacekeeping missions in the Horn of Africa and North Central Africa. And all this, and you just see a really weak content. So we cannot be speaking about how the West is out to break us, and they actually keep us afloat. The population, when it comes to population, I would agree with conservative Africans who say that population is not necessarily the problem. China's 900 million population in the 1970s was a problem when China was roughly like what Indonesia or maybe the Philippines is today. But because of China's industrialization, its current 1.4 billion population now, of course, has become an advantage. It's the biggest consumer market in the world, or at least about the same level as the US. So now, what was a disadvantage, which in 1979 was China introduced the one-child policy, now it was an advantage. So in terms of cars, the internet, consumer goods, retail, and everything, China is now, a beneficiary of that population. It's the world's second largest economy because of the population. India has about 400 million less than China, and for all the stock of India rising, India last year just managed to get where the US economy was in 1928. So India is an example of what much of Africa is, of Africa's problem, not being so much that we have many children and large families, but we have a large population, or disproportionate to large population, relative to our resources, to our skills, our education, our infrastructure, our facilities and schools, and so on. Finished university 5-6 years ago, and you're paying school fees for 3 of your siblings, taking care of your parents' medical bills. Just think what would happen if you had 5 children. And that's why families are getting smaller in Uganda, not necessarily because it's fashionable and it's all the same in the West, but just, if I'm single and I'm 25 and already, as soon as I get the salary within 3-4 days, it's all over because of all these expenses. Think how many children I'm going to plan to have. Of course, it's going to be 2 or 3. So that's just my view. My view is that the West does the right intervention, and my personal view is, my latest thinking is that I think we need what China is to Hong Kong, a one country, 2 systems political arrangement, where political administration leadership is under the African majority, and I think the civil service of Africa should then be ring-fenced, quote-unquote, to the West. We just not good at public administration, not good at timekeeping, no pun intended. I want to lecture us, but we're just not good enough at the things, the discipline that is required to create an industrial society. David said there can say what he wants to say, but then what about the discipline? Every single day in all Uganda's daily newspapers, every single page, no less than 5 typos and spelling errors. Just basic primary school requirements for national newspapers every single day from January to December. If you can't be thorough with basic, I'm talking about kind of grammatical and spelling errors that in primary school have you repeat classes, and these are national daily papers and TV stations, the screen captions, every single day of the year. If you lack that basic diligence, how are you going to produce microchips that propel you to industrial area? So, in summary, going to begin the aid, we can do without it, forget our pride, and if only the West would negotiate with African countries to leave the social, religious, and cultural areas alone, give us the aid, and then leave us to work our way out of it, but not that we can do the aid. Thank you.
Tim, if I could just ask you, before you take the microphone away, you talked about African states being weak states as a foundation for why they need aid. But before even the colonial governments came here, we had strong civilizations, the Uganda civilization, the Mansa civilization that appeared going back.
Because all that is just, it's all this fanciful, because Winston Churchill came and was surprised that Uganda wasn't as backward as expected, and suddenly there's all this stuff Uganda came to us, and I keep asking the question, so if Africa had all these strong civilizations and strong societies, why were we colonized so easily? In most of Africa, we had to fight, 3-4 explorers, Speaker and Grant, David Livingstone, Henry Stanley, just walking someplace, have a discussion with the king, and that's now, taken over by France. Let's just be modest about where we were in the 19th century. In fact, if you look at us today, you just think, if this is how we are today, look at all the important areas of intellectual productivity, our book production, newspaper reading, the internet content we upload. Africa is in lower single digits around the world. 1% internet penetration, 1% social media, 2% of everything. This is in 2020. Imagine where we were in the 17th century.
All right, I want to be able to make some responses.
Thank you so very much. But then there are actually a few things that I wanted to point out, which I did also point out in the presentation, maybe not explicitly so. It's about the aid and the fact that Africa gets the $50 billion per year, about $50 billion a year ODA, and that's why I put it next to the amount of money that we are losing in illicit financial outflows. So we cannot say Africa needs aid without acknowledging the fact that we are losing. The bucket is leaking almost as much as it's being put every single year. If you do the mathematics, we are losing almost $1 trillion a year through illicit financial outflows, when we are then still turning around and continuously taking aid. And one other reason why I put up the graph going up, because sometimes it's easy to see things in a graph format. You can see what has happened over the years. It is true, Africa receives aid. It is true, yes, Africa needs aid, because even in addition to the examples you gave in the book, I did speak about what happened in Malawi when there was the Cashgate incident that happened, and it was such a scandal that the Western community actually punished Malawi by saying, we're not going to give you aid. So that was clear to know what happens to an African country when you switch off the oxygen instantly, which is the oxygen being aid. They almost crashed. Then it was found out that more than half of their national budget, in fact, comes from aid. And I do not deny that fact, and I will not argue over that fact. It is true, Africa does need aid, but one, you cannot ignore the amount of money that is flowing out illicitly and getting lost somewhere via corruption. And you also cannot ignore the fact that there are no real plans in place, because yes, Africa needs aid today, but what about the 30-year plan, the 50-year plan? When they're talking about something like the Sustainable Development Goals, before that Millennium Development Goals, we had 15-year plans, we had 10-year plans, but nobody is laying out a 10-year plan as to how we can actually get a little less aid. We're getting $50 billion. How about you tell us how we can go from being recipients of $50 billion aid package to $35 billion? At least I want to see that. It's not that I want to say, oh, let's not have aid by next year. I'm saying in the next 35 years, can we get to the point where we are going back to at least where we were in the 1980s, if nothing else, looking at the graph. We keep receiving aid, and it's not also consistent with inflation. I think it is more consistent with the kind of financial outflows. And you talk about them not just being, it's just what the West wants, it's what the West likes, it's, it's not really that they have an agenda. This is exactly the mindset I had for many, many years, and really, I didn't want to get into any of this, saying, yeah, they're targeting Africa, and then you look like that person who is the, wearing a tinfoil, and you are the conspiracy theorist. I do hate conspiracy theories. But I had to come to that conclusion for a few reasons. You went back and you talked about the environmentalism and what it has become today, it's become a religion. In a similar way, the ideology. These ideologies that underlie a lot of these projects are also almost to the point of a civil religion for some of them. People who are defending family planning is not just because they think it's a good idea. A lot of them, and those who have worked in the HIV area, will know that even when you're proffering solutions that you think will be very good, you're talking about real robust plans for abstinence and fidelity, that they refuse. At the UN, we had a huge fight 2 years ago where, I think it was Malawi, there was some country that put in one single line in a resolution. A very, very single line. This was on something that had to do with HIV and sexually transmitted diseases. They just said, abstinence can also be a way, or something like fidelity can also be a way of reduction. Denmark, Norway, we saw them in broad daylight. I saw them, they were staying up all night fighting for this single line that was put by an African country to be removed. Is it because, they just have some good ideas? No, it's because this is a religion. Because sometimes, we as Africans putting things in resolutions at the United Nations and other forums, and they don't care. If it's something that doesn't really get straight and all that, there will always be some kind of concession. But when we go anywhere near programs like this that actually touch on ideology, then we find out it's a religion for them. I also know that because I live in the United Kingdom. And some of these things, we can see the ideology playing out. I see it. I work in a place where I can never, openly raise my voice. Yes, within my department, among those who are friends, they do know I'm pro-life. But for the hospital, it gets to a point where if my hospital ever found out that I am sitting here in this forum, speaking to you, in this very forum, in a country like Uganda, I could lose my job for these few hours that I'm spending with you here. So people, my colleagues know, but my hospital in an official capacity does not know, because it's a religion to them. And they can whip up anything in the name of their religion, which would go down to ideology. And we say they are coming with ideologies that are now tied to aid. Perhaps before they had great ideas, or some good ideas, and some not very good ideas. So it could be mistakes. But now they are coming with a fierce ideology, and I say this as someone who knows and someone who has fought many, many times at various forums. We go to meetings at the UN, and it's anything short of, just a physical fight, because we are sitting there in those rooms where those policies are being made. You mentioned Planned Parenthood, Maristos International. We see them here in Uganda, but we are not where we see them in the United Nations, where they are sitting with nations. They sit together with nations on panels, but a nation cannot have me on their panel, because they would say my views are so radical. These views that I'm talking about are so radical, but they would have Planned Parenthood sitting with nations, co-sponsoring events. So it's not just me saying or making up the fact that, it's not really that they're targeting Africa, it's just that they have some bad ideas. No, we've gone past that stage, I think. With all due respect, we've gone past that. And anyone who doesn't know, it should just look at what's happening in the United States, in the United Kingdom, where people are losing jobs, where people are being thrown in prison. I got a letter from jail from a woman who was pro-life and ended up in jail. It's an ideology which is also now become a religion, which has taken the place of God. And as far as they are coming towards Africa, I could rise up as a they're more than half my people.
Okay, there are some questions from the audience. Others are a little difficult to answer, but I will attempt. It says, Dr. Christine, why can't scientists find ways of supporting overproducing? Okay, a mother who is overproducing instead of reducing childbirth intervals as the only method. First of all, the earlier you start producing, the more children you will have, definitely. Because the productive age, the Gaussian curve, is roughly from 15 years to 49 years. So imagine if you start childbearing at 15 and you don't do anything about it. By 49, honestly, you'll have as many children. But that curve can go as low as 10 years and as high as 52 years. Now, for you and I in this room who have been educated, as my sister mentioned, sometimes education is a way of family planning. Because when you are in school, you want to suspend child production or marriage until you have finished school. And if you go to medical school like me, by the time you finish medical school, you are maybe 24, 25. And then you get married. By the time you start having children, maybe you are 26, 27. By 32, you want to do masters. And then you may have had 2, 3 children and you stop there, and then you go on your masters. So naturally, what you do and what you know helps you plan your family, isn't it? Yes. But a lady in the village, when I was still practicing, I still do, but not as much, I came across a grandmother who was 28 years old. But that record has ever since been broken. The youngest grandmother in Uganda is now, I think, 23. Yeah. That means she had a child when she was 13, and by the time she's 26, her child is 13. And that 13-year-old also has a baby. So that means when you start early, you have more children. But I thought I explained this. Family planning can be natural or medical or surgical. Naturally, you want to abstain at such a time when you are ready. And for scientists, those are the 2 methods. Either on pills or injectables, or surgically, you may be, let me use this word, castrated. Yeah. You may have a vasectomy or tubal ligation or whatever. Best family planning method for like you young people is abstinence. The slogan is no sex without marriage or before marriage. So that is already a family planning method because you're waiting until such a time that you are married. And when you get married with your husband or with your wife, you can decide on how many children you want to have and which method. But it has to be done professionally. Because when you go to a professional, then I go to the second question. That profession must explain to you the side effects, how it is done, what it is done. But if you do it behind doors, you may run into people or practitioners who may not tell you all this. And then what Reverend Cameron said will happen to you, the side effects, and you will not know what to deal with. So really medically, that's my explanation of this. The second question is talking about why can't the Ministry of Health come out with policies, tell people the side effects of family planning, and also close up abortion centers and so on and so on. Various talks is mentioned. Right now, I'm not in the Ministry of Health, but having worked there, I can respond. In Ministry of Health, our policy is that when you go to get services, you have the right to be told, these are the services we are going to give you, these are the side effects you will get, and when you have these side effects, come back to us, and we'll be able to help you deal with that side effect. So if you go to any service point and you are not given that information, you have the right to demand it. Yes, you have the right. Not just family planning, but any other medical services. You have the right to know the range of services, what the side effects are, and when you get them, where you can go for help to be helped. But as a matter of closing up those other places, I really don't have the mandate now to respond to that.
Yes, well, this is something that is affecting us right now as young people want to look out for jobs. Someone is looking for a job. Of course, first of all, of course, like, I want to be this kind of person. Why do you want to be that? I want to get money. Others are driving. Others are doing this. I also want to get there. But I think one of the things is that as you study, you need to develop values within yourself that have to make you be patient and look out to what God has in store for you. Usually what I tell people is that the reason why you are not getting money is because you have ill motives. Why do you need the money, and what do you want to use the money for? So first thing is, why do I want this money? I want it quick, but why do I want it? So I think you need to help yourself to develop values within you that need to help you be patient and go slowly until God gives you what He wants to give you. But going so quick is falling into the trap that we've been discussing here, that sometimes you end up getting money which is going to enslave you, and you are never going to get out of the trap. I think there are a number of things that we've not mentioned here, but which are mentioned actually in this book. When you read this book, I try to scan through a little bit in this book, and I realized that some of the money that we want quickly has been in exchange to our moral values. And that is why some of us have ended up being victims of homosexuality and all kinds of sexuality. Name them. Some of them you can't mention them now. So I want to encourage the youth who wants to get quick money to be patient, develop your values, know what you want, and know what you are, what your value is. You are not just equal to money, but your value is much more precious than the money that you want to get so quickly. So be patient and go slowly. At the right time, you'll get what you want.
So I have a couple of questions here, but I've only, some of them are very related to the others, so I've just put it into three categories. So the first one was a question on the Sustainable Development Goals that I mentioned a little bit earlier. For those who don't know, Sustainable Development Goals were put together by the United Nations to replace the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs that we had from about 2000, I think, through the millennium. But then this one only just 2015, I think it was. So the MDGs lasted about 15 years. The SDGs are now into the future. I think there's a 2030 date on it as well. So it's the UN coming together, deciding on a number of things or a number of goals that they would use in helping, particularly the developing world. So it's things like, by 2030 we want 70% more education, more people educated and all whatnot. So there's a couple of things about the SDGs that happen behind the scenes. The SDGs didn't just turn up one day. The SDGs were written over a period of years. When I started doing some of this international pro-life work, met the international community or came on the scene of the international community, and then I was told, oh, the MDGs are coming to an end, the SDGs are now being compiled. So back in 2013, 2014, seen the SDGs were actively being put together, and the UN was saying they were open to people coming together for suggestions. They were inviting civil society organizations to come forward, NGOs, if you have good ideas. Let us know what you think. Countries were discussing, they were having meetings across the world in different places. And sometimes I wonder how they manage to fly to all these countries to have meetings. But these people, a lot of money is spent doing that. But however, I had the privilege of being invited to Geneva at one point in time to make some kind of contribution at a side event that had to do with the SDGs. And myself, along with some other people who are working from a similar point of view, we brought forward just one single proposal because we knew the UN was coming together with all kinds of things. And we said, okay, let's make a positive proposal. It's not just all the things that we're fighting that we didn't want to see as part of the Sustainable Development Goals. We said, make one of those goals the family. Because wouldn't it be wonderful if the family is one sustainable development goal, that is, the family as a unit is recognized by the international community as a unit through which, in many cases, education, basic education is done, healthcare, all of that, care, security in many cases. So we were making these huge proposals. In fact, a friend of mine had put forward a whole book on how the family can play out as a full, independent goal within the Sustainable Development Goals. They listened to all that. There was some opposition, and those that we had, because when I was invited to speak on the family at the UN office in Geneva, at this side event, I said, what is not to like? There is nobody who can come against family because we all come from families, no matter where you come from, right? You'll be surprised. So I sat there and I talked about the family, and lo and behold, in the audience there were people who then raised objections, and those were, you know, some lesbians who were saying that the view, the African view that I was putting forward, and some other people were putting forward, is excluding them and the kind of family that they want to set up. There are other people who want to set up other kinds of families, and they had a fight with that. And so they objected very fiercely, very strongly. So we were not surprised when the SDGs came out, and it was everything except the family. I was telling Dr. Lawrence the other day that when we then got the full copy of the SDGs, when it was launched and released, we did a lot of word count and a lot of word search. The first thing we searched for was for the family. It wasn't part of any goal, so we wanted to search and see if the family was a sub-goal of the major goal. And we put in family and we searched, and whenever family came out and was mentioned in the SDG, they were talking about family planning. Or they were talking about how there was abuse in the family. So not even one single time from cover to cover of the SDGs, as big as the SDG eventually, I think it was like 160 pages, it was quite robust when we checked everything. Never once was the family ever referred to as anything positive. But then we are seeing a lot of that, and we've seen that even before that, even after that, even in smaller resolutions. The SDGs could have been good if family was recognized, and you know, the world was going to invest in family, and through family they were going to get to all kinds of people. But having said that, there are also two parts of the SDGs I can say particularly that are very difficult and that are very problematic. Yes, there are a lot of good things within the SDGs, very good things, so I say that in full disclosure and for the record. But then where they talked about equality, when you read the subtext of it and all of that, you would find out that a lot of what has been put in comes almost from the blueprint of some version of feminism, a strand of feminism which we all recognize, those of us who have any dealings with the West. And if you know the feminism of Gloria Steinem, again, this is not conspiracy theory. These are, you know, the views when people say equality, equality is wonderful. Yes, we want a world where, you know, male and female are seen as equal in dignity, but we are always different. You know, we are always different in the role that we are supposed to play in society or in the family. So that had a problem, and also the part of the section reproductive health and rights, of course, had all those things where you can easily fit in abortion and then it sticks. yes, they did include abortion as a part of the goal, but then it's the language that was used, and part of it that a lot of African countries and other countries did fight against, but there were things that they couldn't eventually get removed by the time the SDGs were then launched. Then another question that came was a question of side effects and the contraception, some of the things that I mentioned. Of course, I am not a doctor, I am a scientist, I work in healthcare, I work in diagnosis, and that's why a lot of things I talk about is usually diagnostic, and I know how to say what the problem is, I don't know so much how to say what the solution is. Not speaking from a medical point of view, but from a human rights, knowing what happens in the West. I did mention in the presentation that sometimes when people, I have a lot of friends in the UK who are on various kinds of contraception and birth control and all of that, and many times there will be problems, but what strikes me is how easy it is for them to take care of it. So a girl that I was working with, a very young girl I was working with one time, she had some kind of implant put in. This was when I was working in Canterbury, Kent. And she had all these side effects. The next day she went to the hospital and she came to work with a little butterfly plaster here, and I asked her what it was. She said she went to have it removed. That easy, not a problem. But in the African context, especially in the rural areas, what we constantly find when we interact with women, when we speak with women, especially women in villages, is that they have these people come with their mobile clinics, go with the mobile clinic, the mobile clinic comes through, they offer them contraception. From a legal point of view, you can easily see when you discuss further with them that there may not have been full and informed consent. They will just accept it because some nurse who is more educated than they are is convincing them to take it. Sometimes, as Reverend had mentioned, they think it's marvelous, this is it's something exciting, something secret. They go in, they have it, and when the side effects start to come through, that's always a problem. And guess what? The mobile clinic that gave them the contraception is long gone. 10 months ago, 5 months ago. So that's another thing. So these side effects that then happen, that in many cases, in other parts of the world, in developed parts of the world, there might be channels through which women can take recourse in the judicial system. You should be able to get back to the person who gave you the contraception if you have some kind of debilitation or life-changing side effects. There are some that really lead on to death, and I have spoken to doctors who have dealt with women in rural areas who have eventually died as a direct result or an indirect result of contraception given by some of these kind of mobile clinics that don't come back for any kind of follow-up. Actually been settled by pharmaceutical companies for things that have gone bad with contraception giving in the West. People who have received thousands of dollars, in some cases millions of dollars. There was, I think it was one particular type of implant that was given in the late 1990s. The payout was more than $50 million. And then women were being given because the company in the African continent. And why is that? Does it mean nobody has had side effects? No, we see cases of side effects, but nobody can chase it up. And in full disclosure, I want a way that I can chase it up. If anyone knows, how we can do that. I was speaking with a lawyer today, and I'm saying Africa should be considering more how to go after some of these people individually so that we can get some real justice for these women. And that's what they haven't had, and that's what I think that we should be thinking and what we should be thinking about. Because by the time the company pays out a couple of millions, they'll just get tired and say, these Africans, maybe we shouldn't give them this contraception anymore, we're tired. All right? So the side effects in Africa is the one thing. The African population and the young people, somebody asked about the young population. Yes, Africa has an incredible amount of our population, a percentage of our population who are young people. There is something they keep calling the demographic dividend. It is true, we do have very young population. It is true, yes, it can be a disadvantage. It can be a disadvantage when there is no education, when we know what all the problems are. You have a population, and maybe half of that population, maybe more than half of that population do not have the sort of education that would then translate into jobs that can sustain families. Let's just put it that way. But if we know the problem, we also know that at least a large part of the solution is that we should channel some of this big amount of money to more education. The education funding we see keeps going down, whereas other things keep going up. Yeah, why don't we, why don't we invest more of all of that in education and training and in things that would help our people go towards changing the population, or getting the population more sharpened, if I can put it that way, just sharpening the population so that we can reap the dividend of our great numbers, as China now is. That's it. The agenda, somebody asked about the agenda, and I think I answered the question. They said, what is the agenda? Why do you think the West keeps doing this? But I think when they wrote it may have been before I had the response that I had earlier, because I think I spoke about the agenda. And I'm hoping that what I said made some sense to you, is that there is an agenda. No matter what anyone says, I think there is an agenda, because even I am living on the edge of that agenda. As I told you, I could lose my job by being part of this event. So yes, I do know there's an agenda. And we keep fighting that agenda anywhere we see it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We just want to give the minister, State Minister for Gender and Culture, some time to make some comments of our own.
Thank you so much, our guest speaker. And as I was seated here, I was wondering, actually I thought if I had come in the morning, I would have made a better response to the interview I just had a few minutes just before I walked in. It would have added more value, because I was sharing about African culture, and my desire was to get back the drawing board, what have we not done right in our African culture, just before we point a finger at another person whose agenda we already know. And what can we do better? Justice Chebet Mike, our guest speaker today, Honorable Christian Ando, and the journalists, I'm sure the Reverend. I'm glad to be with you today. I came with the talking notes that were based from the invitation report. And of course, if I had found time, or if I had gotten a copy of the book, perhaps I would have added much more value. Nevertheless, I am privileged to be here. To begin with, I've been wondering, I'm a teacher by profession, and in teaching, we learn the principle that the learning is from cradle to death. And since this is an academic environment, I would have wished to learn more about the recent agenda that targets culture and climate change. It's a new development. Culture is not one area that foreign aid has ever targeted before, African culture. But of late, it is very closely related to climate change. And I've been wondering what is the magic behind this. I always wish to research. But I have the honor to address you on this very important event, as we discuss this very important topic of preserving our culture and using it as an engine for development. The government of the Republic of Uganda is committed to the preservation of culture and has been consistent in pursuit of cultural development as a contribution to national development. The focus of the Kenyan government is to preserve, nurture and market our positive culture and social norms, but also pass them on to the next generation. And we have a focus on eliminating of harmful cultural practices and norms which undermine the dignity of persons and are more in line with universal human rights, for example, female genital mutilation, and marriages and forced marriages, which still exists within our culture. The Ministry of Gender and Social Development is the national machinery mandated to strengthen the social transformation of communities through preservation, promotion, and development of culture and family values. The government is committed to promoting culture regionally and internationally, and has consequently signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, which was ratified in 1987, 1992 Convention on the World Natural and Cultural Heritage, and 2003 Convention on Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage. The international commitments are demonstrated through Constitution of the Republic of Uganda and other laws, policies and programs. The government organizes the family as the first line in modeling the child with appropriate values, norms, and stands the kind of human capital that we need to drive the economy to the middle income status. The Constitution defines the family as a group of two or more people related by blood, marriage, and adoption. And there are two types of families in Uganda: the nuclear and the extended family. But of late, we have children-headed families and female-headed households. Up to 30% of Ugandan families now are family-headed households or child-headed households. So the extended family is a group of people that consists of the nuclear family, parent and children, and other blood relatives, often spanning 3 or more generations and live in a close proximity. But all this written and discussed, we have a lot of interferences from our normal cultural ways and practices in life. We also point the finger at ourselves that there are also some other cultural practices, norms, that we need to review. Like recently, I made a statement as we reviewed female genital mutilation. And there is this other female genital mutilation that we never talk about, which is practiced within the Bantu communities. And when I made mention about it, it made a big story. And it has attracted a lot of attention. And I don't mind the big story that it makes again, because I stand for the value that I believe in, and I know it will not go easily, just pushed away. But it is many people to appreciate and understand the concept against which I write this. The issue is, first of all, protecting the dignity of a child and a girl child is what we are talking about. 2, we have ratified all these laws, human rights, inclusive, age of consent at 18. But we continue to manipulate a girl child between 8 to 12 being prepared for marriage, whose body and mind is not prepared for. And I am not criminalizing anybody. I am only saying, let's look back and rethink where we went wrong. What can we change? I am not against the practice holistically, but I am against the time and the age at which it begins. And also the ideology pumped into a baby at 8 years, you're literally a baby, worth being in Pampers. And also look at how families, parents have deleted their responsibilities and have turned children, our children, into school children and forgotten that we're parents. This is critically important. for us to first point a finger at ourselves before we put a finger against another person. Whose interests are we serving? We should be able to serve our own interests first. We have invested heavily in education, and we need to keep and support children to be kept in school for a bit longer. My mother started producing at 29, but she was able to produce 6 children. Yes, at 29. And she was busy working, she's a teacher. So I mean, when somebody has capacity, you can even choose to produce twins every time. Yes. There is science now and technology that can allow you to produce either what single sex, twins, triplets, if you wish. But it's about what time you begin, whether you have the capacity to support them, maintain them, nurture them, and here we are. When all these manipulations are coming, it's because they have understood how easy it is to manipulate the African society. So the entry point is through our culture. One time, one president of the US made a statement that I got very, very angry with. He says Africans spend 70% of their time thinking about their genitals. And I was really, very offended. Yes, he's the president of a big country whose names I will not wish to mention right now. But I looked back recently when I was being accused and made fun of, and wondered why are we not concentrating on other things. It's because we are thinking, it's because much of our culture is centered about reproduction. Reproduction. So when you talk about reproduction, you simply have pointed a finger at Africa. Because at age 13, 60% or 80% of our society at age 13 seems to be very active. So I think culture is one area that we have to concentrate on and think openly and very objectively and debate rationally, so that by the time we choose mechanisms of sustaining ourselves independent from a foreign donor, we have really covered all the gaps that seem to push us into a tendency of being beggars, a tendency of corruption, a tendency of immoral behavior. Corruption begins with us, with the way we live. I was looking at the myths around it. You know, if you don't do this kind of FGM, you'll not be able to produce children. If you don't do it, you'll never be able to marry. If you don't do it, it is for purposes of warmth, protection. But I said, wait a minute. What measures warmth? The thermometer. So the thermometer that we know. So if it is beyond 37 something, that means you are normal. You just go to the hospital. If it is below, you are still not normal. Go to the hospital. That's what it means. And the myths around not producing children are that we are capable of producing children. Our environment is conducive enough for us to produce children. But we need to keep children more in schools so that when we want to contract anybody to construct a road, it is 80% who are our own. So to cut the long story short, I really appreciate my sister for coming to share with us your views. I know they are inspiring, but they also raise us eyebrows on where did we go wrong, that we need to put things right. One important opportunity we have is the human capital. Uganda is now 44 million people. We are more productive than perhaps Japan. We have a lot of resources, natural resources. that we can harness and tap. We only need to close ourselves in the room and say, where do we begin from? And take radical decisions. Because I am sure those who donate to us do not have more than what we have. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. I now want to pass on the time to our guest of the day. This is my opportunity to give us his address.
Thank you very much. Allow me to start for very selfish reasons. Because I succeeded in demolishing a very, very big hamburger which he had prepared in his house. It's good to see you, Dr. Jack Dr. Chibita, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you very much for coming and being part of this. I'm going to just make some random remarks because it's a very, very big, fertile subject. And if I'm to delve into analyzing and discussing and summarizing, we could be here for another day. But of course, somebody asked about the agenda, and of course, as she was diagnosing and all, of course, we were saying, okay, what is the aim, what is the agenda, and all. And the closest she came was to say it's a war against fertility of the African woman. And of course, the question was, is it philanthropy or neocolonialism? And I remember the saying, which you know, that maybe he who pays the piper calls the tune. I remembered some people who went for a meeting in Botswana. Of course, you singled out Botswana, but it was an HIV meeting with the donors and the World Health Organization, UN, and they were waiting in a hall like this, and they were waiting for the Minister of Health to come, and the Minister of Finance, and they were presenting papers about how much money would be required. And this person told me, the Minister of Health of Botswana came in and said, before we begin the discussion, I've been sent by the government of Botswana to tell you that Botswana does not need any money for this. And the meeting was thrown into disarray because money had been brought to be given to the government of Botswana. But the minister came and said, we don't need any money now, can we discuss? It's amazing how that can change the equation. You also mentioned, and this was borne out by my good friend Dr. Noah, that seems the more educated people don't have as many children. In fact, the more education, the less children. And of course, there was a joke going around school fees time, which has also been borne out, that the greatest contraceptive is the school fees. But of course, before all this has been said, those of you who read the Song of the Widow know that Okeocha, yes, Pabitek said, books have crushed your manhood. And so, if this has been said so many times, why don't we put money in education then, instead of family planning, since we know that with education we'll be hitting two birds with one stone. Where do we go from here? Of course, we've seen a lot of things happening from the African continent, not so good things. A friend who sits at the airport told me he sees plane loads of young Ugandan girls going out, plane loads. And in equal measure, he sees plane loads of Indians and Chinese. I have nothing against them, they are my friends, coming in. So, what are the Ugandans looking for out there? What are the Indians and Chinese looking for here, which the Ugandan cannot see? And the same thing happens in the Mediterranean Sea. Hundreds of Africans drowning in the Mediterranean Sea, trying to go and look for opportunities, and yet other people are seeing the opportunities here. And somewhere the Bible says, without a vision, the people perish, and they are perishing in the Mediterranean Sea and other places. Trafficking is a big, you know, I've just left the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions. One of the newest and fastest growing of crimes is trafficking in persons. And it has been a dilemma for us because we have these labor export companies and all, and they sign agreements with some people of your age, you know, and in law we have a willing seller, willing buyer, can be a tempter, you cannot say stop, grown up. In fact, there's a time with the State House Anti-Corruption Unit, we intercepted 98 girls. And we were trying to, you know, disrupt. Eventually, that's what it was. But the girls turned against the police. They said the police was frustrating them and that kind. And then they reach there, they are sending all these messages, we are in trouble, our country is not helping us. So, where do we go from here? And that's why I thank you all who have come, especially the young people, because when I was in law school, we were being taught about class society, feudalism and all. Those of you who went to law school at that time remember. And we were talking about peasants. And one of the students asked the lecturer, so what can we do about peasants? And he said, the first and most important thing you need to do about peasants is don't be one of them. So I think one of the first things you people who are here in the audience need to do about all these problems, don't be one of those people trafficked, don't be one of those people who has to, you know, drown trying to go elsewhere when the answers to your questions are here. And it all goes to something I learned long ago in religious education. I was taught that to make progress in life and to have a healthy self-esteem and maybe to make something out of yourself and a very good contribution, you need to ask yourself 3 questions. The first question you need to ask yourself is, who are you? At that time, they didn't make much sense, I thought. But it is a very fundamental question. Who are you? And the second question you need to ask yourself is, why are you here? And by here we mean in this world, and for that matter in Uganda. Why are you here? Why were you not born in Hawaii? Or Antarctica or somewhere else? And the final question in that series was, where are you going? If you can sit and stop doing social media for about an hour and ask yourself those questions very honestly with yourself, I think we'll be going towards solving the problem that has been diagnosed, and she has said her job is to raise the questions. And our sister has said there are books with answers. Please, there are so many books written. I think there have never been as many books written as by Ugandans as today. And many of them are very rich. Please read these books. I see that social media has crushed your reading abilities. Finally, I would like to thank, on your behalf, our guests and the panelists, and my friend Timothy Kadejira. I hadn't seen him in a long time, but he's still on form. He hasn't changed his views. He has not disappointed, but thank you for spicing up our discussion. Dr. Loa, thank you for bringing us a medical perspective, and Reverend Ngenye Canon, thanks for bringing us the perspective of a mother and from the church point of view. It has been said that until the lion learns how to write, the story will always be written by the hand. Thank you very much for coming.
Development is competitive. For those of you who know scripture, think of Abel and Cain. His brother did well, he didn't, and he killed his brother. And we have never stopped since then. Development, indirectly or directly, is competitive. And I want to thank you all panelists for giving us that insight. There are 4 things that we have to pray about
human being has got value and knowledge. Environment that God has given us. Technology that we create. And organization. And here we talk a lot about the main organization, which is the family. You think about all that has been said in those 4 dynamics. And you judge yourself that God wants to hold us responsible in those 4 organizations, 4 systems of development. That is environment, technology, population, and organization.